monarchy will be shifting in a slightly different direction.
I think it's safe to say that change is...
The document was ready. The position had been selected, and King Charles believed the matter was moments away from being settled. But before the appointment of Camilla's sister could be formally approved, Prince William stepped forward with an objection so direct that the room fell silent. This was not a minor disagreement over charity administration. It was a confrontation over family influence, royal credibility, and who truly had the authority to protect the monarchy's future. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles tightened his grip on the pen. Across the table, William held his ground, knowing one signature could push a private family bond into a public institution. The Royal Heritage Foundation, a charity responsible for historic properties, education programs, preservation grants, and donations linked to the crown, carried more than money. It carried trust. Any question over who controlled it could stain the monarchy far beyond that room. The king had personally backed Annabel Elliot, Camilla's sister, for the new role of Foundation Guardian. That title meant a senior overseer with influence over strategy, appointments, access, and the organization's future direction. Charles saw experience, loyalty, and someone he believed would protect his legacy. William saw something more dangerous, a family connection being given institutional power before independent scrutiny had begun. William spoke carefully, but he did not soften the meaning. Annabel could not be approved without a full review and the consent of the governing council, the body legally supervising the foundation's decisions. His words landed like a challenge. Charles froze, the pen hovering above the page, and stared at his eldest son as though the objection had crossed from procedure into betrayal. The prince felt the cost immediately. He knew contradicting his father could wound their relationship, yet silence would be worse. Silence would allow the appointment to move forward and leave the future king responsible for defending it later. He had read a confidential briefing, a restricted internal report meant for senior decision-makers, warning of conflicts of interest, blurred family boundaries, and the appearance that the foundation was being reshaped around Camilla's personal circle. Then the room changed. Charles slowly placed the unsigned pen beside the document, not in surrender, but in controlled anger. William did not move. Neither man claimed victory. Beyond the closed meeting, a message reached Camilla, confirming that her sister's appointment had been stopped. She read it once, then again, and the hurt hardened into something far more serious. What began with an unsigned document would soon expose how much every person in the room believed they stood to lose. Behind the argument over one foundation position were four people bound by loyalty, marriage, blood, and succession. Charles saw an experienced woman he trusted. Camilla saw a sister who had remained beside her through decades of judgment. Annabel saw an opportunity to serve the institution her family had entered at enormous personal cost. But William saw something different. A boundary disappearing, a warning being ignored, and a future monarchy being placed in danger. Charles carried the foundation close to his heart because it reflected the causes he had defended for years: historic preservation, architecture, conservation, and community work. The organization was not simply another royal charity. It was part of the king's legacy, a living record of what he hoped his reign would protect. He believed personal trust mattered, especially when placing someone near sensitive properties, major donors, and decisions tied directly to the crown. Annabel Elliot seemed, in his eyes, like a natural choice. Camilla's sister had long understood the pressures surrounding the queen consort, and she had moved quietly through private royal spaces without seeking public attention. Her knowledge of residences, design projects, and family routines made Charles see her as dependable. He did not view her as a political figure. He viewed her as someone who would guard what mattered to him. Camilla read the message alone. The words were brief, but the wound was immediate. William had stopped the appointment. She stared at the screen, her expression tightening as the meaning settled in. To her, this was not just a challenge to Annabel. It was a rejection of the people who had stood beside her when royal acceptance had once seemed impossible. William prepared for the consequences in silence. Before meeting Catherine, he removed his cufflinks and placed them carefully on the table, as though controlling that small movement might steady everything else. He admitted that stopping his father could permanently damage their relationship. The prince had protected a boundary, but he knew Charles might remember only the defiance. Catherine listened before asking the question William had been avoiding. Was the concern truly Annabel, or was it the precedent her appointment would create? He answered without hesitation. It was both. One family appointment could open the door to another, and then another, until personal loyalty became more powerful than independent judgment. Charles felt the challenge just as sharply. In a private conversation recorded in a senior aide's written account, the king said his son was beginning to behave as though the next reign had already started. The remark exposed the fear beneath his anger. William was no longer merely advising him. He was beginning to restrain him. The disagreement looked sudden from the outside, but William's decision had been building for weeks. One earlier incident involving a foundation property had already convinced him that the line between private influence and public responsibility was disappearing. To understand why the prince acted so firmly, the story must return to the moment that first turned his unease into resolve. The confrontation at Windsor did not begin with an appointment paper. It began weeks earlier, during what was supposed to be a quiet dinner at Highgrove. There were no cameras, no public speeches, and no reason to expect a family gathering to become politically significant. Yet one conversation about a foundation-owned residence, spoken casually over dinner, convinced William that plans were already moving ahead without proper scrutiny. From that evening onward, he knew silence would be interpreted as consent. Charles had been searching for a faster way to shape the foundation around his priorities. He wanted fewer delays, fewer inherited advisors, and more people he trusted personally. The Foundation Board, the group responsible for approving and supervising major decisions, had become cautious after years of public scrutiny. To the king, that caution felt like resistance. To William, it was protection. Camilla shared her husband's frustration. She believed too many officials understood procedure, but not the man behind it. The queen consort wanted people close enough to recognize what Charles meant before his ideas were weakened by endless review. She saw loyalty as efficiency. William saw the danger of loyalty becoming access. Then Annabel Elliot spoke. During the Highgrove dinner, Camilla's sister mentioned that she had already reviewed renovation concepts for Ashcombe House, a foundation-managed property supported through charitable funds and royal oversight. She spoke casually, almost as though the matter had been settled. William stopped eating. The future king asked who had authorized her access to the plans. Charles answered first. He said he had requested an informal opinion. The king insisted Annabel understood historic interiors and had offered useful advice. Camilla quickly defended her sister, saying she was only helping and had never claimed formal authority. Annabel felt the mood change. She placed her napkin beside her plate and explained that she had never intended to overstep. Yet her attempt to calm the moment only deepened William's concern. He asked whether she had seen projected budgets. She admitted that figures had been discussed. He then asked whether timelines and contractors had also been mentioned. Her hesitation gave him the answer before she spoke. The dinner never recovered. William left Highgrove with more than discomfort. Through a documented follow-up from a senior foundation official, he received confirmation that Annabel's proposed guardianship had been under quiet consideration for several months. The conversation had not been an innocent request for advice. It was evidence that influence was already being exercised before any appointment had been approved. Then the final detail arrived. William learned that the appointment document required only Charles's signature to move forward. The prince understood that caution was no longer enough. The next conversation could not be softened, delayed, or hidden behind family courtesy. The Highgrove dinner had revealed the plan. The Windsor meeting would determine whether anyone still had the power to stop it. When William entered the meeting room, Charles was already seated beside the appointment file. No aides remained near the table. No cameras recorded what followed. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then the king drew the document toward himself, and the prince placed one hand firmly over its edge. It was a small gesture, but its meaning was unmistakable. A son was asking his father to stop. An heir was challenging his sovereign. William kept his voice controlled. He explained that the proposed guardian role could not be treated like an honorary family gesture. A foundation guardian, meaning a senior figure with influence over strategy, financial oversight, historic properties, and future appointments, would hold real power. That power mattered because the foundation depended on donor trust, public confidence, and the belief that decisions were made for service rather than family advantage. Charles did not accept the warning. He argued that Annabel Elliot had experience, discretion, and years of quiet knowledge surrounding royal properties. The king insisted that trust should not be confused with favoritism. To him, his sister-in-law was not an outsider seeking influence. She was someone proven, loyal, and already familiar with the work. William answered more sharply. He told his father that the monarchy could not ask the public to trust its charities while privately placing relatives into powerful roles without open evaluation. The prince did not raise his voice, but the words struck harder because he spoke them so calmly. He was not questioning one appointment alone. He was questioning the judgment behind it. Charles rose from his chair. The monarch accused his son of seeing every decision through the fear of scandal. He said leadership required judgment, courage, and the ability to act without surrendering to every possible headline. William did not move. He knew the argument had stopped being about Annabelle and had become a fight over whose idea of duty would shape the crown. Then the prince opened a confidential governance briefing, a restricted internal report prepared for senior decision-makers. He read a passage warning that the appointment could create accusations of family capture, the belief that one private circle had taken control of a public institution. The same passage warned that major donors might lose confidence. Charles heard more than criticism in those words. He realized members of the governing council, the group legally responsible for supervising the foundation, had already spoken to William. His son was not standing alone. People inside the institution had chosen to warn the future king before the monarch completed the appointment. The silence returned, heavier than before. Charles closed the folder without signing it. Yet he refused to withdraw Annabelle's nomination. William had stopped the pen, but he had not ended the fight. The appointment was still alive, and the next struggle would be fought through rules neither man could ignore. Royal power often appears absolute from a distance. Inside the palace, it is constrained by signatures, trustees, charitable law, reputational risk, and people willing to say no. Charles could support Annabelle. William could oppose her. But neither man alone controlled the foundation's final decision. As legal advisors opened the governing documents and trustees began making private calls, the family discovered that the true balance of power rested with individuals who had no desire to become characters in a royal war. Charles still carried enormous influence as royal patron, the senior royal figure publicly connected to the foundation and expected to support its mission. Yet influence was not the same as legal control. The foundation's charter, the formal rulebook governing how it operated, required major appointments to pass through an independent nominations committee before reaching the governing council for final approval. The king could recommend, he could persuade, he could not simply command. Lady Margaret Henshaw felt that truth more sharply than anyone. As chair of trustees, meaning the person leading the group legally responsible for protecting the charity, she received separate calls from both royal households. After the second conversation ended, Margaret removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes. Supporting Charles could damage trust in the foundation. Supporting William could be seen as humiliating the monarch. Either choice carried consequences. William faced pressure of his own. One advisor suggested a compromise: withdraw the objection, allow Annabelle Elliot to take the position, and quietly restrict her authority. The prince refused. He said a weakened appointment would still send the same message that family access could open doors closed to everyone else. He knew a private compromise might end the argument, but it would not remove the risk. Then the committee found the detail that changed everything. The proposed foundation guardian role had been drafted only recently, and its powers overlapped with duties already held by existing trustees. That raised a dangerous question. If the foundation already had people responsible for strategy, appointments, and oversight, why had a new position been created at all? A second document made the answer more troubling. The guardian would have been allowed to attend private strategy sessions and recommend future members. What appeared ceremonial was in fact deeply influential. Annabelle would not merely advise from the edges. She could help shape who entered the institution after her. Margaret read the papers again before calling the trustees together. The decision came with little celebration. The appointment process would be suspended while the role, its purpose, and its candidate were formally reviewed. Charles understood that the matter had slipped beyond personal persuasion. William understood that the foundation had finally protected itself. But Camilla received the news differently. Her sister's name would no longer be quietly approved. It would be examined. For William, the suspension was protection. For Camilla, it felt like a public trial had begun inside her own family. The first visible casualty of the confrontation was not Charles or William. It was Camilla. She had spent years learning how to endure criticism without allowing the world to see where it landed. But when the formal suspension notice arrived, there were no crowds to face and no ceremony requiring composure. There was only a closed door, a sister's name on an official page, and the painful knowledge that the objection had come from the man who would one day inherit everything. Camilla read the notice twice before setting it down. The nominations committee, the independent group responsible for reviewing senior candidates, had paused the guardianship process while it examined the role, its purpose, and the way Annabelle had been selected. The decision mattered because it placed the entire appointment under formal scrutiny. What had begun as a private royal preference was now being treated as a possible governance problem. Annabelle received a separate instruction. She was advised not to attend upcoming foundation meetings or take part in conversations about royal properties until the review ended. The restriction cut deeper than a delayed title. It suggested that even her informal involvement had become sensitive, and that every previous conversation could now be examined through suspicion. Charles entered quietly, but Camilla did not wait for reassurance. She asked whether William would have objected with the same force if the candidate had come from Catherine's family. The Queen Consort knew the question was painful, yet she needed him to hear it. To her, this was no longer only about rules. It was about whose relatives were accepted and whose were treated as a threat. The king told her the suspension was procedural. Camilla turned away. She said procedure had become the language people used when they wanted to exclude those close to her, without admitting it openly. Charles tried again, but she had already heard enough. His careful words could not erase the humiliation she believed her sister was suffering. Then Annabelle called. Her voice broke during the private telephone conversation, as she offered to withdraw voluntarily. Camilla's sister said she would not allow her name to deepen the division between the monarch and his heir. She wanted the argument to end, even if ending it meant walking away from the role completely. Camilla refused. She warned that withdrawal would look like an admission of wrongdoing. Charles heard the exchange and understood the trap. If Annabelle stayed, the review would continue. If she left, the public might assume guilt. Someone would feel defeated either way. That night, the king made one final decision. He asked William to meet him privately at Clarence House, with no lawyers, trustees, advisors, or spouses present. After days of arguments carried through documents and intermediaries, father and son would finally speak without anyone standing between them. There was no appointment file on the table when William arrived at Clarence House. Charles had removed it deliberately. For the first time since the dispute began, they were not speaking as patron and future patron, or sovereign and heir. They were speaking as father and son. The anger had not disappeared, but exhaustion had softened its edges. And in that quieter room, William finally explained that he had not intervened to humiliate Camilla. He had intervened to protect Charles. Charles spoke first. He said loyalty had become harder to find because royal relationships were often shaped by duty, caution, and fear of betrayal. A royal patron, meaning the senior family member publicly linked to a charity, was expected to lend trust and direction. Yet the king admitted that trust felt most secure when it came from people who had remained close during years of pressure. William listened without interrupting. He acknowledged Annabelle's devotion to Camilla and the private support she had given when acceptance inside the family had been uncertain. The prince made clear that he did not see her as malicious, dishonest, or unworthy. His concern was what the appointment would mean once personal gratitude became institutional power. Then William admitted the cost. Stopping the signature had been one of the hardest decisions he had made, because he knew his father would see defiance before protection. He had challenged the monarch in the room, but he had also wounded the man who raised him. That truth had followed him long after the meeting ended. Charles answered with an honesty he had avoided before. He had wanted to reward someone who stood beside Camilla when the royal family offered her little comfort. The king believed Annabelle had earned trust through loyalty. Yet as he spoke, he recognized the danger. Gratitude could look like entitlement when it opened doors that others had to compete to enter. William then disclosed what the confidential donor discussions had revealed. Several major supporters had privately considered delaying future contributions if the guardianship proceeded without competition. Their warnings had been recorded in internal correspondence, shared with senior foundation officials. The threat was immediate. Without those funds, preservation projects, educational programs, and community grants could all suffer. Silence settled between them. Charles finally said he would not force the nomination forward. He asked only that Annabelle's dignity be protected, and that no public statement suggest misconduct. William agreed. The role would be reviewed, the process opened, and her name separated from any accusation of wrongdoing. For the first time, father and son had found common ground. But peace inside Clarence House offered no protection from what came next. News of the blocked appointment had already begun moving beyond the palace. The private conflict had reached a compromise, but the outside world was about to turn one unsigned appointment into a national judgment on royal power. By sunrise, the dispute was no longer confined to Windsor, Highgrove, or Clarence House. It was printed across front pages, debated on morning television, and repeated by crowds gathering outside royal residences. Some saw William as a reformer protecting the crown from favoritism. Others saw an impatient heir publicly weakening his father. And at the center of the storm stood Annabelle, a private woman whose relationship with her sister had suddenly become evidence in a much larger argument about monarchy, privilege, and trust. Palace officials moved quickly. They confirmed that the proposed guardianship would not proceed, and that any similar future role would require open, independent recruitment. That meant candidates would be assessed through a formal process, rather than selected through private royal preference. The decision mattered because the foundation relied on public confidence, major donations, and the belief that access to power could not be inherited through family connection. Annabelle received careful protection in the statement. It praised her private service and experience, while making clear that she had neither requested nor received financial benefit from the role. Even so, her name had already become part of the controversy. The effort to defend her dignity could not stop the headlines from turning her into a symbol. William watched the first television reports with Catherine beside him. One commentator described his intervention as a rehearsal for kingship, suggesting that the future monarch had begun exercising authority before the throne was his. The prince switched off the screen. He had acted to protect the foundation, yet the story now made him appear eager to overtake his father. Camilla felt the damage differently. She saw photographs of her sister beneath headlines about royal favoritism and folded the newspaper closed. The queen consort told an aide that Annabelle deserved gratitude, not disgrace. Her anger was controlled, but the pain beneath it remained. A family member who had once offered quiet support was now being judged by millions. Outside Buckingham Palace, the public argument became impossible to ignore. Newspaper sellers held up a front page carrying the words, "William blocks family appointment." A woman near the gates raised the paper toward television cameras and declared, "This is what accountability looks like, even inside a palace." Around her, some applauded while others accused the heir of humiliating the king. Then a respected broadcaster offered a colder interpretation. The decision was not a victory over Charles, he said, during a recorded morning program. It showed that the monarchy had begun policing its own boundaries before public pressure forced it to act. The appointment had been withdrawn, but the emotional cost remained. The family now had to decide whether this moment would harden into permanent bitterness or become a rule strong enough to outlast them all. The final meaning of William's intervention would not be found in the headline, but in what each person chose to do after the noise faded. In the end, Annabelle did not become foundation guardian. Charles withdrew his support for the appointment. William accepted responsibility for stopping it, and Camilla faced the painful truth that protecting her sister's dignity could not require the monarchy to ignore its own standards. No one emerged untouched, yet the confrontation accomplished something larger than preventing one disputed nomination. It established a boundary between private gratitude and public duty, and proved that even inside the royal family, trust must survive scrutiny. Charles chose reform instead of revenge. He formally approved a revised foundation policy requiring public role descriptions, independent candidate assessments, declared family connections, and full trustee consent for senior appointments. Trustee consent meant that the people legally responsible for protecting the charity had to approve the decision together. The new rules mattered because they prevented personal loyalty from quietly becoming institutional power. The review delivered an even stronger conclusion. The proposed foundation guardian position would be abolished entirely. Its duties duplicated powers already held by existing trustees, and the role could have placed too much influence in the hands of one unelected individual. What had been presented as a useful appointment was now recognized as an unnecessary risk. Charles then met Annabel privately. The king apologized for placing her in a position that exposed her name to public judgment. She listened without anger and told him that loyalty should never become a reason for the crown to endanger itself. Annabel had lost the role, but she refused to let disappointment become bitterness. Camilla later spoke with William during a small family gathering. The queen consort did not thank him for blocking her sister, and the prince did not ask her to. She simply acknowledged that he had acted according to the responsibilities he would one day inherit. The words were restrained, but they carried something close to acceptance. William answered with equal honesty. He regretted the pain caused, but not the decision itself. The future king understood that leadership sometimes meant stopping someone he loved before a personal choice became an institutional wound. He had not acted to defeat his father. He had acted to prevent the monarchy from damaging itself. Charles preserved his authority by accepting reform rather than punishing resistance. William strengthened his credibility by refusing to treat the outcome as a personal victory. Annabel withdrew with her reputation protected, while Camilla accepted that royal service could not be handed out as a family reward. The moment was remembered not as the day an heir defeated a king, but as the day a father and son prevented loyalty from becoming privilege. The unsigned page entered the royal archive as proof that the crown endured because one man drew a line and another finally respected it. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.